So this is designed for new teachers who haven't joined the program before, so they're not quite sure what it is. If they're considering it, how could they fit it into their classroom? And then also some of the teachers who first year was this year and are like, all right, I got a taste of it, but like, how can I do it on the next level? Take it to the next level. So yeah, Michael?
So do you want me to talk like all of that now or just kind of introduce myself, then we'll jump back?
Just the introduction. I got kind of a list of questions too, so we'll get there.
Okay, so my name is Michael Dawson. I'm a teacher at Lake Washington High School in Kirkland. I've been teaching there for 21 years now. I've been doing the Capital Classroom project for the last 6 or 7 years. It's been 6 or 7 years since I've joined the program. And every year it just gets better. So the first year was kind of a learning experience for me. I learned what we could and kind of couldn't do. And I've just kind of taken the ball from there and rolled with it. And every year it's just kind of grown. And finally this year culminated in our classroom actually getting our legislation passed that we introduced. So we introduced the free menstrual feminine hygiene products in girls' bathrooms for all secondary schools last year. And then this year it finally passed through and became state law. So it was a great achievement for the class and the kids were really excited about it.
Yeah, it was great to watch. Awesome. Well, thanks, Michael. Corey, you're next on my screen.
Great. I'm Corey Paulson. I teach 8th grade at Open Window School in Bellevue, which is an independent school, K-8 school. And I've been there for 9 years. And I've been working with Capital Classroom for the last 6 or 7, maybe 7. I'm not sure. It's been a while. And in contrast to Michael, I teach U.S. history and language arts in one combined class. So Capital Classroom, I fit it in. I also teach government, but it's not a full government class. And so it's a great supplement to the government that I do teach. And it works with my Washington State history curriculum too, to teach Washington State history and government together and how it all works in conjunction with one another. And I can talk more about it later.
Okay. And I guess I should probably add, I'm sorry, I teach Capital Classroom through my AP government class. So they're seniors, and it's a year-long course at Lake Washington.
All right, Steve?
Well, I'm Steve Lawrence. I teach at Meridian High School. It's up in Bellingham, Washington. And I've been there for now is 28 years, starting on 29 next year. And I've done Capital Classroom since it started. I don't know how many years ago that was. I met David at a conference one time in 9. So met David at a conference and we were friends ever since or whatever. Just was great relationship. Love that guy. And so he kind of got us going on that. And I do it through my AP Gov similar. It's just like you, Michael. I have a year-long AP Gov class, and that's what I teach it through. I do have U.S. history, a couple other classes, but this is the one I use it. And definitely, like you said, it's gotten better. In the beginning, it was just sort of okay, let's just meet with this, person and talk and learn some stuff. And then we kind of got a little more aggressive about trying to find bills. We haven't actually introduced our own bill. That's, I think, maybe the next step. We've just tried to latch onto something that's already there. And find something that the kids are interested in, could support. And I think our highlight was a few years ago getting to when Inslee signed into law the pre-registration of 16-year-olds when they go to get their license. We'd been on that one for a couple of years, and we got to go down, meet the governor, he did a bill signing with us, gave the kids all pens, and that was a big highlight. Plus, one year we got kids to actually testify down in Olympia. It was the randomest thing ever. I always take one day and we just do a field trip down to Olympia. And how this happened, but the day we chose, which I chose back in October, And then we picked the bill in January. And then all of a sudden, the day we were headed down for the field trip, that bill was actually having a hearing in a committee. Our lobbyists pulled strings and did everything, got two of our kids to actually testify. That was a learning experience because the committee chair was a nut. And so can't remember her name, but I think she was Republican or Democrat. She'd been kicked out of she'd been kicked out of the party or censured by the party for the way she treated people in committees. Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, that must have been fun for the kids.
Oh yeah, it was. It was. Yeah, they learned a good lesson about maybe not everybody reads the legislation that's in front of them.
Yeah, could one of you just briefly describe like maybe that what's the difference between that first year and what you're doing now? Like how would you describe Capital Classroom for you now?
So I'll go. So I remember my first year, we kind of did what Steve was doing, where we were just thinking, okay, we're going to meet with a lobbyist. They'll talk about some legislation that's going on in Olympia, and we'll be like, oh, that sounds neat. And we'll kind of follow a bill and just kind of talk about the process. And so I remember Michael Moran was attached to one of my two classes. I had two different lobbyists at the time. And Michael Moran said in their first meeting, you guys can always come up with your own idea, and I can see if that will get passed. I'll try to find someone who will propose that. So we kind of that's when my kids really started to get like more interested in the program, because now it was their ideas. It was a little more like their own hands-on experience. And so that just really piqued their interest. So we tried, and we kind of threw something together last minute and then try to work through it. But it was then, from then on, towards the end of that session, Michael Moran was talking to me, and he was saying, that this is something that, next year, if we want to continue this, we can start earlier in the process with our own legislation ideas. And so then it kind of evolved from then me still having like, okay, kids, what would we want for legislative ideas? And then I gave in the second year, I gave like 2 or 3 ideas to Michael Moran, our lobbyist. He then went out and found a legislator who would craft something around those ideas. And then finally in year 3, we kind of got together and we talked about it and it morphed into then, well, why don't we just have our students pitch those ideas directly to state representatives? So then it came to where, since I have a year long, there's a lot of time to do this. So I would run in basically October, my kids would get into groups and they would come up with their own bill ideas. They would create presentations. What is the idea? Why is it an issue? What are the positives? What is their solution? What do they want done? What are some fiscal notes? What are some downsides that need to be, all these kinds of things. So they would create about 5 to 7 minute long presentations. I invited in a couple state senators and a state representative on 3 different occasions. So my kids would then present those ideas to them. They would get feedback, question and answer. And then luckily out of that, so we'd present 5 to 7 ideas every year. And then one of those state representatives has been kind enough to then propose and draft one of those ideas into legislation and put it through the system. So that's where it's gone from me just like, as kind of Steve said earlier, just meeting with a lobbyist to talk about politics and look at ideas that interest the students, to them actually presenting and proposing the ideas that really interest them. And then they're able to follow something that they created and they worked on and they have more of a passion for. So that's where the real big arc for me has gone, is it's become basically a student-centered project around the student ideas and what the students really want. And so it gets more buy-in from my class.
And I think it's important to note, so like there's, for all the students, all the teachers who are going to join Capital Classroom, it can be from, a senior level course where kids are doing something like that all the way through their whole year, to something that I do in 8th grade, which is, they don't write their own legislation, but we certainly do take time from the beginning of the year, then through the session, to start looking at the legislative process so they kind of know what bills are holdovers from the previous year, which ones they can kind of tag on to. My course is really focused on social justice. And so we're often finding bills that are going to help them continue to find their voice, and bills that they could advocate for. And so that's a big difference kind of from the beginning, I would agree, is like, first it was like, let's meet with the lobbyists, find out how a bill becomes a law. And then really now it's, okay, so what is something that you're passionate about? And then using that bill for a 13 or 14-year-old to see how their voice can really be heard within the government, and then meeting with representatives. And I think that's something that we were not doing at the beginning, and now we really do have the opportunity to do a lot more of, is meeting with, this year we met with the chair, Tomiko Santos. We met with Representative Ybarra. We, had those chances just around our bill that our lobbyists helped us get those meetings for. And then because my class is not government, it's not a government course, all of my students participated in the lobbyist conversations. But then I offer it up as just opportunities for any students who want to go further to write amendments that they can then introduce to representatives, to do the public testimony. And that's all just if they want to become more involved. And I have, about 30 kids in my class, and generally I have about 6 or 7 that want to kind of go a little bit further. And I think it's a great opportunity because that's on their own time. I don't offer extra credit for it. It's just like, hey, if you want to do something else and really hear your voice in the government, then they really feel empowered to do that, while everybody else is still getting the same course content of really understanding not only just the legislation. And for an 8th grader, really going through those fiscal notes, they have a lot of questions of what is this? What does this mean? And then they really get those questions answered and kind of understand how the government, all those little itty bitty nuances of how to advocate within the government comes out through following whatever bill that they pick.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm kind of in between maybe, and that when I guess what I've tried to focus mainly on is trying to use this to help them understand how the whole process works. And so we usually have done, by the time we really started into Capital Classroom, we've gone through a lot of how the legislative process works. And so I usually don't bring much of Capital Classroom into it until about December. But I'm probably going to be changing this next year due to Michael's ideas. But usually what I do is I spend time looking at all the pre-filed bills, and then I come up with, 10 to 15 that look interesting, that I think the students would latch on to. And then I introduce those in January to the students. Then we go through them, and I give them a week. They do some research and kind of look through try to come to their own conclusions as to which ones they like. And the class discusses them, and we usually spend a day debating, that's dumb, all this kind of stuff, and latch on to one that we're going to, adhere to. And then I really try hard to get them we try to meet the sponsors of the bill. We've met a couple times with interest groups that are connected to it, because I always want them to get that, to see the other folks that are involved, that, their view is pretty, limited, in the sense that here's these members of the legislature that they do this, and they sometimes don't get all the other players that are outside. And so try to get them to meet somebody that's connected to an interest group somewhere, either through Capital Classroom, or sometimes I'll just find somebody I know is connected to it and contact them and say, would you meet with my kids and come talk to them about your perspective on this? And so, and then I also want them to develop the skills to discuss and defend or, debate these bills. So we work a lot on that. What are the things that what are the problems with this bill? What are, whatever. We'll do that in class. And so when we have a chance to talk with our representatives, they're hopefully at least ready to raise some issues and get in some discussions. And sometimes those have been really good, and sometimes they're not. They're just there's not that give and take because the representative doesn't want to do it or whatever. But this year we had a really good one with Senator Erickson, and it was a really good back and forth and give and take. And we have he's pretty conservative, and then we have 2 Democrats that are representatives, and that this year was really different because we haven't had that. And first years I was doing it, they were all Republicans, and the kids were all choosing liberal bills, and then they didn't want to talk to us. And and so this year it was, we did the Juneteenth bill, and we followed that. And so I like trying to find something that they can do research on as well. And so we incorporate that, and they, write emails to folks about it and try to get support. And so, but I think that there's progressions here where teachers can start by just listening to the, lobbyists and kind of getting some idea of how it works, then following a bill and actually writing and meeting people to discuss it. And then maybe that next level progression is actually getting them to write their own legislation. I really like that, thinking maybe of that of the flow for teachers to think about. So.
It's funny because I remember all the representatives in my area are all liberals, Democrats. And I always will have at least 1 or 2 groups of conservative students. And when they present their bills, it's always interesting to get the feedback from our state senators or state representatives of how it's, because I remember one year was drug testing homeless before getting services provided for them. And just listening to them, the state senators going, I don't like that idea at all. And here's why. But then having my students understand that, not everyone's going to like your idea. You may think it's a great idea, but then there's the other side of the political realm that really doesn't. But then hearing the criticisms for why it would happen and things like that. And so it's always still a great experience for the kids to see both sides of that.
Yeah.
That's something I do want to dive in even a little deeper. That's something I've always wondered. Big part of this conversation is just the curiosity of what happens in your class in between the sessions that we're, on Zoom. And it's always been I was talking to an organization recently, and they were so impressed by the idea that, teachers are working on having political discussions in class. And that's such almost a taboo issue now because of the polarization in our country. So I wanted to ask, do you, as a class, you can kind of all weigh in, do you all coalesce on one bill, and how do you get to that point if so?
So in my class, yes, we don't have, again, because it's kind of an adjunct to the course that we're having in general, we do all pick one bill, but then the students get to choose, or we pick 2 this year. So sometimes we pick 1 or 2 in case one dies and we still have something else to follow as we're going through. But I don't make the students all come together on one opinion, for sure. And so they are allowed certainly to express their own opinions. And when they're advocating to the representatives or writing emails or doing their public testimony, they can do that on what else they're thinking. And we absolutely are having conversations about that. We start off the year just in general by talking about having a brave space in our classroom. And so this space to really talk about our own ideas, but then of course, always backing everything up with evidence. And so that's one of the things that I love TVW for, is that when we get to watch, the public hearings, or we watch the floor debates on these bills. And so people are talking about, the representatives are talking about their amendments, and they're saying why they want these. I'm really having those students take notes, have conversations about them. So what did he exactly say? Why do you think he said that? Where is that in the bill? Where can we find the evidence for that? Do you agree with that? Why or why not? What other evidence do we have to back that up? And so we absolutely are having those conversations. And it's pretty amazing to see, 14-year-olds who are pretty passionate about their viewpoints, and then to have that viewpoint challenged by, the representative to their face, right? Well, you think it's this way, but actually what you don't understand is, like, this year, one of the bills that they were following had a companion bill in the House that they didn't know about. And so it was like, if we pass this one, then what about this one? And just understanding how the legislature is working and what are like the little nuances of the bill that makes it, as she told my students, wholly unpassable at this moment. And they thought that she was going to be like so on their side because it was a liberal bill. She was Democrat. She was the chair. And then she was like, no, it's wholly unpassable at this moment. Okay. And they had to really take a step back and then go back into the bill and start really thinking, okay, what are the components? We know that she's for it, but why is this here? And so having that legislation and having the availability to go back to the text and to the videos to have those political conversations is crucial, especially for an 8th grader who's really still trying to figure out what they believe, why they believe what they do.
I'd say, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Steve. You can go.
I was just going to say that for my class, my district is an unusual one in the sense that we're very small and we're rural, but we have Bellingham kind of it creeps out into the county. And so our county is just so different. I mean, Bellingham is as liberal as it gets, and the county is as conservative as it gets. I'm usually coming in with kids that are very polarized. And so it's, I guess I usually have all these students junior year, and that's where we start like learning about how we have civilized discussions. And so when I get them as seniors, I love showing TVW the floor discussions. The one that was around the referendum around same-sex marriage was a phenomenal one because the students got to see, and I usually try to re-show that, like, here's how the discussions go. Look at how passionate folks are. They are really passionate about their views, but they do it in a civilized manner, right? They share that, and then they hear out the next person. And so we try to model that in class. Like you have to listen, for the other perspective and share that perspective before you share okay, I get what, actually have them practice that, restate the other person's perspective. Where are they at? Where are they coming from? And so we do a lot of that. But when we come down to picking the bill, it's a challenge. But, I also noticed that a lot of bills that pass have bipartisan support. And there have been a lot of years that there was nothing could happen in Washington. A few years ago that, the Senate was split and nothing got through the Senate without bipartisan support. So we try to find where do you find those bills that have that kind of support. And so that can sometimes be a challenge. And this year with that Juneteenth bill, that was a bit of a challenge because we had a couple kids in the class that weren't against, not against the idea, but the money aspect of things. And so we just work through it, find a way to compromise. And sometimes we've thrown in amendments, at least proposed them to the bill sponsors, like, here's, we'd love this, but what about this or that? And sometimes they've gone somewhere, sometimes they haven't, but at least they get the process and understand that, sometimes you have to compromise with somebody to get 90% of what you want, or even just 50% of what you want. And so.
Yeah, it's been a real struggle as a government teacher teaching politics these last, and people want to say since Trump, but it's been the last 15, 20 years almost, of just the polarization has just been growing and growing. And so I always kind of like my other two colleagues here have tried to make it a point to teach civil conversations around politics. I try to come to it that everyone has the same goal in mind. They just have two different ways of getting there. And, the thing about politics is everyone thinks they're right, but there is no real right answer because it depends on your views and morals and your ideas and all that. And that's why everyone gets so passionate, is like, but of course I'm right. How can you not agree with me? But then to the other person is they're right. And so we always try to have those. I just always try to make sure that we can see both sides of the issues, and that we try to look at things more from a political standpoint than an emotional standpoint. And so, but at least with this project, and that's where I've enjoyed when my kids are presenting the ideas, is we spend a day just brainstorming different ideas, and you'll get liberal ideas, conservative ideas. And then I just say, okay, here are our top, 15 ideas. Which would you want to be a part of in a group? Like, list your top 3. And then that always comes down to then 5 or 7 that get like all the real support. And then usually, because, I'm in a suburban school, and I would say 85% of my students are liberal, it's going to be 5 are going to be liberal ideas and 1, maybe 2 conservative ideas. But at least it will give them, those conservative kids, the ability to work on a bill that they like, and the liberal kids and the ability to work on a bill they like. And I always try to put in a day of where, okay, here are our ideas. So this is the group. Share with us what you're thinking, the class, what you're thinking right now. And now everyone else has to pretend like you are against the bill. Why would you be against it? To give them ideas of what do we need to make sure that we focus on? Because where are the attacks going to come from, and who do we need to appease, kind of. And so I'm always trying to work with my kids around playing the other side as well. Look at, just pretend you weren't against, like, why would you be against this? Even if you're not, just why would it be? And so that way it kind of gets them to see, okay, here is why people wouldn't like this. And like Steve said, a lot of time, okay, maybe they don't mind the idea, it's just too much money. They don't want to raise taxes, so they don't want to do this. And it could be as simple as that. Maybe it is more of a philosophical or moral difference in there. But by hearing those objections, the students can then kind of try to work on them a little bit within their presentations to maybe skew their idea a little bit, or change some things around to help that through. It does, when it does then, like, once our representatives pick the bill that they want to do for our class, that's where I still struggle a little bit, to be honest, to get then the continued buy-in from everyone. Because a couple of years ago, we ran the bill to ban plastic straws statewide. And I had a lot of conservative kids who were just like, I hate this idea, and I can't get around supporting it. And it was like, then that's fine. You don't have to support the idea anymore. But you can still learn through the process. You can still see then, like, the bill process go through. And when we go to do a testimony in front of a hearing, and then you don't have to partake, because I'm not going to make you fight for something that you don't believe in. But you can still, like, be a part of the process and see what's going on, and learn and understand from that. So a lot of this Capital Classroom is not just your one bill idea of conservative liberal, but it's the process. And it's learning how government works, and why government doesn't always work the way you want it to, or way you think it should, kind of thing.
Quick question. Would it be feasible to allow division and have, like, one testifying pro and one testifying against, like, group? Is that?
I think it kind of depends on what the lobbyists can do too, because that's going to be really different depending on how invested or how much time your particular lobbyist has. Because I know that Michael's had, like, the same lobbyist the whole time, whereas I've worked with a lot of different ones over the course of Capital Classroom. And it really depends on how much time they have to dedicate to the class, and how much time they have to kind of work outside of the system to get, additional meetings and things like that. I mean, one year, we got the Attorney General to come to our school and, like, talk to our class. Like, that was really exciting to have Bob Ferguson there. But that was, work that was done outside of the time to get those there on the additional meetings. So to have kids within the classroom, it's dependent on how much can the lobbyists give you, how much time you have in your own class to dedicate to it. I think that in terms of, new teachers coming into this, it's really going to depend on how their classroom is kind of set up in general. I think one of the things that the kids really do get out of this experience, though, is seeing how much power the minority party does have within the legislature in how the legislature works. And I think this is something that kids have no idea about, that the minority does have power in just, in holding bills up, in passing lots of amendments, in withholding support for other bills, and how the actual conversation between the majority party and the minority party works. And I think this is really interesting for them to figure out, because right now, of course, the Democrats are in power, but it's not always like that. And both parties will use the resources at their disposal to get their voices heard. And I think that's really interesting for the kids who are in the minority in the classroom to see when you're in the minority, how do you still get your voice heard within government? And then that could be kind of the same within the classroom. And those are things that at least my students, and I also have, predominantly liberal kids in my class, but there are a few like staunch conservative kids to kind of see, they're always shocked and really interested in that component of government that they never even thought of before. One, how much power the majority party has, and then how does the minority get their voice heard at the same time?
I try to let them, all the kids that don't agree or aren't fully on board, to voice their opinion. I mean, usually what we're trying to do is either write letters or, craft some kind of arguments. And I always let those other voices be a part of that, right? Like whenever we talk, in the letter itself that we're sending, our class is supporting, but we also have this student, or, they will actually express their views that, why they don't support it, just so that they're heard. But it's interesting hearing you guys, because I definitely have a majority of conservative kids, usually, or at least it's a pretty good mix. Come sometimes and they're like, "You mean the rest of the world? You mean the people don't think like us?" Like, I'm like, "Yeah, you guys are really in the minority." And so it's pretty fascinating hearing the opposite views.
Well, I would say that the liberal kids are very similar, right? You mean everybody doesn't think like me?
So I still remember after Trump won, like, just the sheer shock on my students' faces of how could someone not vote for Hillary Clinton? Like, and it's just like, because not everyone agrees the way you do here in Kirkland, kind of thing. And it's just, yeah. But also to your question, Brett, I could have kids testify against the bill as well. I choose not to, because I don't want to start to pit my students against each other. But what I do allow for is, one, when we do send a lot of emails as well, of you can email your objection. So if you can, when I'm having kids email the chair to please pass the bill out of committee, feel free to email and say, please kill the bill. Like, I don't think this should be passed, and this is why, so please kill it. But it kind of more like under the scene, you're behind the scenes, so you're not actually in the face. Or I also just allow them to find a bill that you want to champion yourself. So this is our class bill, and this is the one that's going. But if you want to work on something different, find that bill, and you can work on that bill yourself, so everyone can find something that they want to champion. And then, like, you just send an email about your bill. And so that way the students can kind of take it, and which is also kind of a great thing, is then they can branch it off and they can do the project more around something that they want, even though the class is going to work on this. And when we meet with our lobbyists, we're going to focus on this bill, and we're going to focus on this idea of what's going on. But you can always kind of have your own little side project going on if you want.
That's great. And I just wanted to briefly touch on, I loved where Corey was talking about, backing everything up with evidence. Just a little bit about how that, skill is, some of the skills that you're developing through it, like developing your argument and writing your email. I don't know, just speak to some of that.
So the way my kids do it, they do it in two ways. One, when they give their presentations, they have to have evidence. You have to have an evidence-based presentation what are the statistics, what is, the different things of why this is really an issue and why you're looking at that to help and save. So they really have to focus in on something. So they're not just like, it's not just an idea that I think this is a problem, and then they find that it really isn't. So they have to really find the evidence to back themselves. And the representatives have been great. If a group does come in and they don't give those, they are always one of their first questions is always, where did you get that information? Like, what are your sources for this? Because if you're going to present me with this, I want to make sure it's legit. Or they will say, I just don't know if you have enough evidence to support this claim. So I don't know if I really agree with what's going on. I haven't heard enough. So that's the first area. The second area is then when if they do get to testify on a bill, we really make sure our students, when they give their testimony, that you have the evidence in there. You can go in with like the emotional plea kind of argument, but we really want more of a, like, why is this really? So have your evidence and go in structured. So when my students give testimony, and they've given testimony the last 5 years on a number of different committees and ideas, they're always coming in with, here's some evidence, and so this is why it's important. This is why it needs to go. And we had this year our students on the feminine hygiene bill present to the House Ways and Means Committee. And after our students went and a couple the chairman said, this has been the best committee hearing I think I've ever had, with the most informed panelists ever. And so it was a nice little praise. If it wasn't just a bunch of kids coming up going, please give us products, we would really like it. It was, no, this percent of students have to leave school every day and they miss this opportunity. This percent of students have to deal with this. This is how much money it's really going to cost. It's not that big of a thing, And so it really helps strengthen their argument. So I just make sure that always is a key aspect, because again, part of this is learning those skills to do research and to find and actually have an evidence-based argument for when you're going off in the future. Just everything politically should be based around evidence, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would say that we do it in similarly. With their testimony, of course, they need to have evidence, and we focus on ideas of I'm also the debate coach in my school, so we do a lot of like logos, pathos, ethos. So where are you kind of gathering your evidence from? And then as an 8th grader, testifying to these committees, they really do need to talk like personally, why does it matter to them as well, along with because anybody, any interest group can grab statistics, but then they really need to contextualize those statistics for them. Why does it matter for them? But I think the biggest piece where we're really focusing on evidence, like I also teach language arts, so they write essays as well about government and how does it work, and is predictable outcome is good? Is it good? Is it bad? Why or why not? Do we want this long term? And so they're constantly gathering evidence from their sessions with the lobbyists and from all of their research, because they know they have to write the paper later on at the end. And then, but I think their biggest way of where they're looking at evidence is when we prepare for our meetings with the lobbyists, they always have questions ready. Because I want them to feel like they're really engaged with the lobbyists and getting their questions answered. But I want them to be really informed questions. So I teach them how to write, like they have to have some sort of statement that shows that they've done some research, and then going into their questions. So their questions are long, but it also shows that one, they've done research, they know what they're talking about, and that they have a focus. And that I think really helps them, helps the lobbyists know kind of where they're going to get those questions answered. And then it also allows the students to really delve in. So they're not just asking like, how does a bill become a law, or what happened with this bill? Instead, they're saying, okay, well, I saw on line 4 of this amendment that Senator blah, blah, blah said this. What does that actually mean in context with our bill? And those sorts of things allow them to really get the answers that they want, and then also teaching them how to pull evidence from these places.
Well, I guess I'm going to give some props to the teachers that teach these students before me. Being a really small school, like we have 400 students in our high school, and probably a lot of them take a running start junior and senior year. So we're looking at maybe 80 seniors at the high school by the time we're there, actually. And so it's pretty easy for us as a staff to have a fairly consistent message. There's only going to be a couple English teachers, a couple, history. I'm myself and one other guy. We're the only full-time social studies teachers in the school, and so we can be. I have a lot of influence on. Okay, make sure this is taught to civics and sophomore year, or whatever is that foundation before I get them. So I rarely have a kid comes into class that is making any kind of an argument without some evidence. They're going to get called on it right away. I don't have to do it. Where'd you get that? They're on each other right away. And so that part's, I just feel fortunate that it's not something I'm really having to teach a lot. I have to teach the quality of that support. Sometimes they pull stuff out of you're like, what the heck? Well, it's evidence, I'm like, yeah, okay. I found it here. And so we're working a little bit on that. And then I also do a mock Congress before we do Capital Classroom. And so they're taking bills that are in the federal legislature and Congress, and they're supporting them. And so we've already, usually by the time we start Capital Classroom, they've already practiced pretty heavily supporting our bills, making arguments, going through that whole process. And so by the time we start meeting with lobbyists, I think they're really prepped to know how they're supposed to make their arguments and back them up. For sure.
That's great. Quick question. Do any of you use the modules and things prior to Capital Classroom, or are they helpful, or you do your own ways of prepping?
Sometimes I'll assign a module for homework for them to watch in coming in if we're going to talk about something in the fall, because again, I don't teach government all year long, so I teach government in the fall. How does government work? Remember, they're 8th graders, right? So the last time they had U.S. history was in 5th grade. So it's a little new again. Just how does government work in general? I do that in the fall, and then so by the time we get to the winter, there's a little bit of refresher as we're kind of coming in. So sometimes I'll assign a module, but I certainly don't watch them in class. But if we're going to, when we were getting ready to do the Connects episodes, then I would assign the module. So before we talked with Chief Justice Gonzalez, yes, they had to watch the module beforehand, so they knew kind of what they were talking about, so they could come in looking like they were on those topics. So yes, but not a lot.
Yeah, I don't assign them. I give them as resources. So hey, if you guys here's some resources to kind of just on your own time to fill in. It just, for me, a lot of it too is you get to the point where I do have a lot of other curriculum, and I'm trying to teach that and then put Capital Classroom in as a project as well. So there's only so much time that I have with my kids. Obviously, this last year was a lot different with remote learning and losing my class to half the days and half the time with my classes and stuff. But I give them the modules as a resource bank that they can use to help fill in and watch stuff like that. But we don't necessarily spend the time as a class to watch them all the time and stuff like that.
Yeah, same here. I know that our civics teachers, the guy who teaches civics, he'll use them sometimes with our sophomore students. And so some of them have seen that. And then I have students that are really struggling understanding stuff. I'll give them those as, okay, here, come in we have a study session. I'll have them come in and, watch this and see if that helps you understand it.
Yeah. And Michael, you touched on something that we've also wondered, just the balancing of all the things that you all have to teach. How how does one fit Capital Classroom? I know you're teaching different classes, different expectations and standards, but I feel like that could be a barrier for teachers where like, I can make this extra credit, like how, and then you want to like use it in class time as much as possible. So I get like,
no, yeah. Honestly, I think it fits really well. In a year-long AP government class, you have enough time to fit things like this in. The content is so where you can fit in. And I know Steve said that he also does a mock Congress. I tried to do that one year, and I was like, wait a second. Mock Congress has been basically the exact same thing as Capital Classroom. We're learning the bill process. We're learning committees and committee assignments and who chair people are, and then all their group. And I'm like, the only difference was the mock Congress was on a federal level where Capital Classroom was on a state level, but the whole process was the same. So I realized I don't need to do a mock Congress if I'm doing Capital Classroom. And then there you have the time that you spend on mock Congress can be done doing Capital Classroom instead. When you do it is a little different. Like I said, I start and I spend about 3 weeks or so, 2 weeks preparing and coming up with ideas and stuff like that to present to legislators. We present those end of October, early November, and then I take a break until the session starts. And then once the session starts, then we kind of get back into it. And then it's kind of, okay, here we are in the process. So we're in this committee. What does that mean? And then I just go through what the committees mean. What do we have to do? And then, meet with our lobbyists. So for me, it fits in as a mock Congress. And so a lot of times when you would do a mock Congress, you can just kind of do this. And what I like about this as well is I feel it not only gives the students the personal hands-on aspect of a mock Congress, but also brings in other elements that maybe they don't assume. The year we did a straw ban bill, I personally was attacked by a person for a group who was against this bill. And I was, being called out on Twitter. He sent me a couple really nice emails, but then we were able to put it in of like, okay, interest groups, lobby groups, this is what's going to happen. How do we respond? What is the way to respond? Let's look at the different groups that aren't going to like your bill proposal. And so it brings in all like sort of other elements that the AP curriculum wants you to talk about with linkage institutions and other things like of this all into the project, again, in a more real life setting. And being able to I'm going to email an actual representative about this bill idea, and then they write back of like, no, I don't like this. I don't think it's a good quality for this or this reason. I find is a lot more valuable than doing a mock Congress when my students like try to pretend I'm going to argue your bill, but they're a student on a student. So they don't tend to always want to be mean to their friends. So they won't say something and they don't want to, and when I would do a mock Congress, every bill passed and we would spend about $20 trillion in a session because no one wanted to like, well, I don't want to get their having them fail this project if I don't pass their bill or whatever. I'm like, so we're not being realistic. But here, you can't do that. This is a real life mock Congress happening. So I say if you do a mock Congress, you can fit this in that same time frame.
Well, and I would say if you're looking at middle school teachers as well, because I know that this lends itself kind of more to high school curriculums, but I think middle school can do it as well when you look at your standards and things that you have to cover. So I definitely work in like evidentiary analysis. And so that's something that I have to teach. And so you could do it this way as well. And so how to construct a really succinct paragraph with a topic sentence and analyzing that evidence and transitioning into your next paragraph. And that's all writing because I teach language arts too. So that works really well with that. Very easy to do. And then on the social studies side, all of my history is constantly connecting to current events. And so that is where for a middle school teacher, I think where you're helping the students really pick the bills that are going to fit well with your curriculum and the things that you have to cover, because it's not a government class, it's a history class and social studies. So you're looking at, okay, so which ones are going to connect to my immigration unit, for instance? Like, well, I have to teach immigration. So if we pick a bill that's focused on immigration, then that will really help us there. And we can see, like, why is the government looking at this part of immigration? What is the history that leads up to that? So it does take a little bit of finagling from the teacher to kind of figure out where do you want your kids to go and how is that going to connect with your curriculum that you have to teach anyway. But I think that it's totally doable in that. And it's going to be different as to the level, of course, of the students that you're teaching and how much time you have to devote to it. I certainly don't have time in my curriculum to do what Michael does, but I do certainly have time to have the kids really go through one or two bills and really research them and pick the ones that they're interested in. Like I said, I do, I think like Steve said, 10 or 15 that they kind of look at and then narrow down to the one that they want to follow. That's kind of what we do as well. So it can fit within your curriculum, but you do need to say, like, okay, I need to cover this. How will this work within there?
And also, if I can just jump back in real quick, again, kind of talking about, it depends on how the level of how much the teacher wants to get involved in Capital Classroom. If they want, they can do 5 days of meetings with the lobbyist. That's about a half hour or one class period. So this project, you can get involved in Capital Classroom and really only do those 5 days where you just have that interaction with the lobbyist and you talk politics and you talk government, what's going on, and then you're done. And I would think a lot of people could probably find 5 days over a 2-week period or a 2-month period, 3-month period to do this. So, again, it's how far and expansive do you want to take this project? I'm someone who I've taken it and I've kind of made it a lot bigger because I find it works well and my kids really enjoy it and I enjoy giving them that experience. But you can also just start out doing little and just kind of seeing how the process goes and how it works and, just utilizing the resources that are available to you and kind of fit it into your own program and then figure out ways to kind of let it grow. I think what a lot of teachers would find is if they start low, when they're talking about other things, they'll always be like, well, kind of like, our bill that we're doing, or, remember back to the Capital Classroom project. And they're always be like, wait, I can bring this up in this instance as well. So I can kind of make this a year-long project, always kind of bringing in bits and pieces throughout the year, or at least throughout the semester.
Yeah, I guess my kids first, Michael, probably shoot me if I got rid of the mock Congress, because it's kind of a legend. I got kids coming into class going, when do we start mock Congress? I heard about last year. So I'm like, I don't know. I kind of like my job. So.
It's funny for me because that's where kids come into my class going, when do we get to start getting our bill ideas out there? When are we going to present our ideas? So my Capital Classroom was kind of like your mock Congress.
Yeah, that's cool. I just I agree with Michael that with AP Gov as a year-long class, you have plenty of time. There's no reason you can't do to whatever extent you want to do Capital Classroom. And for me, I just block out. Once we get to January, I block out 1 day a week that's Capital Classroom. And so one of those days we're meeting with the lobbyists, one day we're might not be, we're writing or we're talking about the process or following up on it. But I'm fairly kind of crazy organized like that. And so I have, just all the calendar every week, what day is our Capital Classroom day. And so even if we're not meeting a lobbyist, we're doing something related to it. And that way I know where I can fit it in the curriculum.
Yeah, same with me, right? Yeah, you gotta schedule it in so that because or else it'll get eaten up by something else very easily. But imagine, as high school teachers, if your students came into high school already having been exposed to this, and they, understand at least the basics of government and have already done this, and then how much further they could go. And so I think that's the cool idea of getting more and more schools involved, and just having kids at a younger age really understand the power that they have in the government, and how to get their voices out there. I just think is amazing. And so if they could get it in, 8th grade and then again in, 11th or 12th grade, then they really are, they're able to capitalize and build upon that knowledge that they got earlier. So hopefully we can get more schools involved earlier.
Yeah, it's really great to watch. I feel like there's just this empowering, of themselves, finding their own individual voice, so it's nice. It's great to watch. Yeah, I mean, we're running pretty much on time here. So, I guess one quick question: is there any sort of I'm not being a teacher. Is there a seal of approval or some sort of thing to make it does that even exist for the program?
Like sometimes schools will actually, any curriculum you want to do or include, there needs to be some kind of an approval process. And I know there's in our school, there are certain things that if you wanted to do that or introduce it, there is if it was an actual curriculum of some sort, we would have to go through a process, but it's not really. And so I just tell them we're doing it. And
okay.
That's that.
Well, yeah, I appreciate
some
it.
schools, I could imagine there'd be some discussion,
I mean, it doesn't cost any money. So that I think is a key component, that if it costs money, then it would have to go through more channels for sure.
Great.
And since we're doing it I'm with when we meet with our lobbyists, it's through a class setting. Yeah. If it was something more of hey kids, just go and meet with the lobbyist on this own time or something, then you'd have more of the legal issues and all that. But the way it's done right now is it's almost, and I don't Capital Classroom provides me support and materials to teach what I want to teach myself as a curriculum. I can create the curriculum. And then Capital Classroom provides me, well, here's a lobbyist you can speak to. Here are some resources, some videos, some other things that you can, let's connect you to these types of people and these people, and here's some things. So it's just stuff that I can just kind of, find and pull and use on my own. So it's great. And so so I don't have any issues or anything with materials or anything like that. So Corey talked about how if we had 8th graders doing it and then they came to the high school with all that experience, I just, I've had a lot of students who as seniors who have left, who've come back and told me or emailed that they have now, from what they learned through the Capital Classroom project, they're like, hey, I just want to let you know I testified remotely on a bill because I now understand the Washington State website. I was looking at a bill, I found this thing, and I signed myself up. So they've taken these skills and they're like, they now know how to involve themselves politically in the process, where I think a lot of just normal people, they have no idea. How do I champion this idea or I'm against this idea? What do I do? They don't know. And so at least through doing Capital Classroom, my students now know how they can have their voice heard within the Washington State government system. And so it's just been kind of, it's nice for that as well. It's really shown them how to get involved, which is important.
Yeah, I had a kid who was helping her mom testify, who wanted to testify but didn't know how. And so she was like, oh, I know how. You just go here and then you sign up and you'll be fine. But you need to make sure that your testimony is only this long and that you know how to write it. And you need to make sure that you say that you're for the bill or against the bill at the beginning, because I didn't do that. And then I got called out on. And so it was just all of these nuances that she was able to tell her mom how to do it. And I've definitely had high schoolers come back to me and say, oh, I was lobbying for this bill because I learned how to do it in 8th grade and then was able to do it as, an 11th grader at their high school. So,
yeah.
There you go.
Very cool.
Win-win.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Nice to meet you both.
Everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Enjoy, everyone. Have a great school year.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
should. Summer first.
Yeah, great summer first. Yes,
Bye.
always.
Absolutely.